North Pacific Ocean, near Midway Atoll, June 4, 1942, 4:30 a.m. The Pacific before dawn is a flat, endless darkness. Wind moves across the surface in long, slow patterns, barely disturbing the water. The horizon cannot be seen. Only the low mechanical hum of engines and the occasional metallic sound of equipment shifting on deck breaks the quiet. On the flight deck of the American aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, sailors move carefully under dim red lights. The ocean air is cold. Salt spray gathers on metal surfaces and on the canvas jackets of the deck crews. Far to the west, beyond the darkness, another fleet moves through the same sea. If you care about real World War II stories, not myths, not Hollywood versions, but the moments that actually changed history, then this channel is made for you. Subscribe to keep these stories alive. Like the video so it reaches others who still value history over noise. And if you know a friend, a veteran's family member, or anyone who grew up hearing these stories, share this with them. Because these stories weren't meant to disappear quietly. They were meant to be remembered. Now, let us begin. 4 carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy, Akagi, Kaga, Sōryū, and Hiryū, advanced toward a small American outpost in the Central Pacific, Midway Atoll. Neither fleet can see the other. The distance between them is measured not in miles alone, but in uncertainty. Inside the Combat Information Center aboard Enterprise, officers stand over charts lit by shaded lamps. Pencils move across maps. Bearings are written and rewritten. A few hours earlier, reconnaissance aircraft have reported contact. Japanese forces approaching from the northwest. The information is incomplete. Positions shift with every estimate. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the largest naval battle of the war in the Pacific is beginning to assemble itself. The men who will fight it cannot yet see the ships that will determine its outcome. Above them, the sky slowly begins to change. The eastern edge of the horizon turns pale gray. Clouds hang scattered across the early morning sky. In the ready rooms beneath the flight deck, American pilots sit quietly beside their equipment. Some drink coffee from tin mugs. Others check maps folded into their kneeboards. They know only fragments of the situation. The Japanese fleet is expected. The carriers must be found. And when they are found, the attack will have to be immediate. On the other side of the ocean, aboard the flagship carrier Akagi, preparations are already underway. Japanese flight deck crews move with practiced precision. Aircraft are rolled into position. Bombs are lifted into place beneath wings. Fuel lines run across the deck as engines warm slowly in the growing light. The attack against Midway has begun earlier that morning. Aircraft launched before sunrise are already approaching the small American base, preparing to strike runways, hangars, and fuel stores. The men working on the deck of Akagi know their routine well. Many of them have served together since before the war began. They have participated in operations that reshaped the Pacific Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean raids, attacks against British and American positions across thousands of miles of sea. Their confidence is quiet and professional. The Imperial Japanese Navy has built its doctrine carefully over decades. Carrier aviation has become a precise instrument planned, rehearsed, executed with discipline. Yet the ocean hides more than one fleet this morning. Back aboard Enterprise, an officer steps onto the flight deck and looks eastward as the sun begins to rise. The light reveals the wide gray expanse of the Pacific. Waves move slowly beneath the hull. Aircraft sit in tight formation across the deck. Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighter escorts. Each machine is carefully maintained. Each crew waits for orders that have not yet arrived. Below deck, intelligence officers review intercepts collected over the past weeks. Japanese naval codes have been partially broken. Analysts believe Midway itself is the target. But code breaking is never perfect. The exact location of the enemy fleet remains uncertain. At Midway Atoll itself, hundreds of miles ahead of the American carriers, Marine Corps aircraft crews prepare for another day of patrols. The island is small, just coral sand, airstrips, and defensive guns surrounded by open ocean. Search planes lift off one by one, spreading across the Pacific in wide arcs. Their task is simple in theory. Find the Japanese fleet. Report its position. But the ocean is vast, and a fleet moving at sea leaves almost no trace. By early morning, reports begin to reach the American carriers. Some sightings prove incorrect. Others are incomplete. Then, shortly after sunrise, a reconnaissance aircraft from Midway transmits a message. Japanese carriers have been sighted. The words pass through radios and command rooms quickly, but the implications take longer to settle in. Somewhere ahead, beyond the clouds and distance, 4 of the most powerful carriers in the world are moving toward the same battle. On the flight deck of Enterprise, engines begin starting one after another. The quiet of early morning disappears beneath the roar of aircraft warming for launch. Men move quickly now. Fuel hoses are removed. Bombs are secured. Pilots climb into cockpits. Orders arrive that leave little room for hesitation. Aircraft will launch. They will search. And if they find the enemy carriers, they will attack immediately. North Pacific Ocean, northeast of Midway, June 4, 1942, 7:15 a.m. The morning sun climbs slowly above the Pacific, turning the water into long bands of pale silver. Wind moves steadily across the flight decks of the Japanese carrier force as aircraft return from the first strike against Midway Atoll. Engines whine as landing gear touch down on the decks of Akagi, Kaga, Sōryū, and Hiryū. Deck crews run forward the moment each aircraft stops rolling. Propellers spin down. Pilots climb from cockpits stiff from the long flight. Some aircraft return damaged. One bomber carries a torn wing panel. Another leaks oil across the metal deck as mechanics rush toward it with tools. The attack on Midway has met resistance. Anti-aircraft fire, intercepting fighters, and the unpredictable confusion of combat. Inside the ready rooms and operations centers, officers study the first reports coming back from the strike. The damage inflicted on Midway is real but incomplete. Airfields remain usable. American aircraft are still operating. On the bridge of Akagi, Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo stands quietly near the chart table. The wind moves across the bridge windows. The sea stretches empty in every direction. Nagumo commands one of the most powerful naval striking forces ever assembled. His 4 fleet carriers form the core of Japan's offensive strength in the Pacific. But command at sea is rarely simple. The first wave of aircraft has returned with a message. Midway will require a second strike. In response, preparations begin to change. Aircraft that had been held in reserve, originally armed with torpedoes for use against enemy ships, begin to undergo reconfiguration. Torpedoes are removed. Bomb racks are adjusted. Armor-piercing weapons are replaced with high-explosive bombs intended for land targets. On the hangar decks below the flight decks, mechanics and ordnance crews work among rows of aircraft. Bomb carts move across the steel floors. Fuel hoses run between machines. Men lift heavy munitions into place beneath wings. The work is routine, but it fills the confined spaces with fuel vapors and exposed explosives. Meanwhile, reconnaissance aircraft continue searching the ocean beyond the Japanese formation. Some reports return without results. Others arrive too late to be immediately useful. Then, shortly after 7:30 a.m., a message arrives from one of the scout planes launched from the cruiser Tone. The signal is incomplete at first. It reports sighting enemy ships. The exact composition is unclear. More information follows slowly. The message suggests the presence of American naval forces somewhere to the northeast. The timing creates a problem. Nagumo's aircraft on the hangar decks are now being rearmed for another strike against Midway. Torpedoes have been removed. Bombs intended for land targets are being prepared. If enemy ships are indeed present nearby, those weapons will not be ideal. Orders must be reconsidered. Inside the carriers, crews pause briefly as new instructions begin circulating. The process of rearming aircraft begins again. Bombs are moved. Torpedoes are brought back out from storage. Fuel lines remain connected. Aircraft stand closely packed together in the hangars, wings nearly touching. Above them, on the flight decks, Fighter patrols circle the formation, watching the sky. The pilots flying these patrols know American aircraft must be somewhere nearby. But they do not know when they will arrive, or from what direction. Far to the east, American carrier aircraft are already in the air. Squadrons from Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown have launched hours earlier. Navigation across the open ocean is uncertain. Wind and distance push formations apart. Some groups fly too far north. Others search empty stretches of water. Fuel gauges begin slowly descending. Pilots look out across the vast blue horizon with no ships in sight. The Pacific offers few landmarks. Only clouds drift across the sky. Then, just before 9 a.m., the first American torpedo squadrons locate the Japanese carriers. They approach low over the water. Their aircraft, Douglas TBD Devastators, are slow and vulnerable. Japanese fighters quickly intercept them. The sky fills with twisting aircraft and streaks of gunfire. One torpedo squadron after another presses its attack. Most are shot down before reaching launch range. Few torpedoes find their targets. But the attacks force the Japanese carriers to maneuver sharply. Fighter patrols are drawn downward to sea level. Defensive formations shift rapidly in response to the incoming threats. Above the battle, unnoticed for the moment, the sky begins to change again. High above the clouds, another group of American aircraft continues searching. Their altitude keeps them hidden from the chaos unfolding below. They are dive bombers, and they are about to arrive over the Japanese fleet. North Pacific Ocean, northeast of Midway, June 4, 1942, 10:18 a.m. At nearly 20,000 feet above the Pacific, the air is thin and cold. The Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers move in loose formation through scattered cloud layers. The ocean below is mostly hidden, broken only by brief openings where sunlight reaches the water. Inside the cockpits, pilots lean forward against the wind pressure pressing against their canopies. Oxygen masks rest against their faces. Frost gathers faintly along the edges of instruments. For nearly an hour they have been searching. Fuel gauges have fallen steadily. Some crews are beginning to calculate the point at which they must turn back. Then the clouds open. Below them, through a break in the white cover, the ocean suddenly reveals movement. Ships, not one or two, an entire formation. Long gray hulls cutting through the water at high speed. White wakes trail behind them in parallel lines. At the center of the formation, for aircraft carriers. Flight decks stretch across the sea like narrow islands of steel. For a moment, the formation of American dive bombers continues forward in silence. Each pilot sees the same scene. Each understands what it means. The Japanese carrier force has been found. Below, the Japanese ships are already reacting to earlier attacks. Minutes before, torpedo bombers from American squadrons had approached at low altitude. The attacks had been costly for the Americans. Most of those aircraft had been destroyed before launching their weapons. But the assaults forced the Japanese carriers to maneuver. Fighters from the Combat Air Patrol had been drawn down toward the surface to intercept the torpedo planes. Many now circle low over the ocean. On the carrier decks, the situation remains complicated. Aircraft that had been prepared for a strike against Midway are still being reorganized. Some are armed with bombs intended for land targets. Others are being reconfigured again for potential attacks against ships. Fuel lines have only recently been disconnected. Armed aircraft are positioned across the hangar decks and flight decks awaiting further instructions. In these moments, the carrier force exists in a state of transition. And transition at sea is often dangerous. High above, the American dive bomber formations begin adjusting their approach. Lieutenant Commander Clarence McCluskey leads one group from Enterprise. Another group, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey and Lieutenant Richard Best's squadron, begins aligning for the attack. Pilots open their dive brakes slightly, stabilizing their aircraft. The carriers below grow larger with every passing second. Sunlight reflects off the long decks of Kaga and Akagi. On Sōryū, aircraft remain visible near the forward elevators. At this altitude, the Japanese ships have not yet detected the dive bombers. The noise of earlier attacks still occupies their attention. Fighter patrols remain low over the water. Anti-aircraft gunners scan the horizon. Then one lookout glances upward. The alarm spreads quickly across the ships. But by then, the American aircraft have already begun their descent. One by one, the Dauntless bombers roll onto their backs and tip forward into steep dives. Airframes tilt downward toward the carriers. The sky above the Japanese fleet fills suddenly with falling aircraft. Dive brakes extend from the wings. The sound becomes a high mechanical vibration as the planes accelerate. Inside the cockpits, pilots focus entirely on the target centered in their sights. The ocean rises rapidly toward them. The carriers below attempt to respond. Anti-aircraft guns open fire. Shell bursts appear in black puffs around the descending aircraft. Gunners track the falling silhouettes as they grow larger. But the dive bombers have already committed to their attack. The angle is steep. The descent is fast. At this moment, the Japanese carriers are exposed. Flight decks remain crowded. Aircraft stand armed and fueled. Ordnance lies prepared for launch operations that have not yet resumed. The first American bombers pass through the lower cloud layer. They are now visible to every ship below. And they are still falling. North Pacific Ocean, northeast of Midway, June 4, 1942, 10:20 a.m. The dive continues. The SBD Dauntless bombers fall through the final layer of cloud with the ocean rising rapidly beneath them. Air roars across their wings as the dive brakes hold the aircraft steady in a near-vertical descent. Below, the Japanese carriers grow larger with every second. From the deck of Kaga, the sky suddenly appears filled with falling aircraft. Lookouts shout warnings across the deck. Anti-aircraft guns fire upward, their shells bursting in tight black clouds that briefly stain the clear morning air. But the dive bombers are already inside the defensive envelope. Inside the cockpit of one Dauntless, the pilot keeps the carrier centered in his sight. The long wooden flight deck stretches across the frame of the gun sight. Aircraft are visible along the deck edges. Crew members run toward their stations. The aircraft continues downward. Altitude unwinds quickly on the dial. 6,000 feet, 5,000, 4,000. At this distance, individual shapes become clearer. On the flight decks below, Japanese deck crews attempt to move aircraft aside. Some fighters have only recently landed from combat patrols. Others remain parked, armed and waiting. Fuel hoses and munitions carts have been scattered across the hangar decks below. The carriers have not yet resumed launching their own strike aircraft. The formation is caught between operations. The first bombs are released. From several thousand feet above Kaga, a Dauntless pulls its release lever. The aircraft lurches slightly upward as the weight leaves its centerline rack. A 1,000-pound bomb begins its own fall toward the carrier deck. The pilot pulls back hard on the control stick, forcing the aircraft out of its dive just above the ocean surface. The engine strains as the plane climbs away. Behind him, more dive bombers follow. The bombs fall silently at first. Then they strike. One explosion tears through the forward section of Kaga's flight deck. A second bomb lands near the island superstructure. Another penetrates the deck and detonates inside the hangar. Flames erupt almost instantly. Fuel vapors ignite with violent force. Armed aircraft inside the hangar decks begin to explode as secondary blasts ripple through the ship. Across the formation, other dive bombers target Akagi. Compared with Kaga, the flagship presents a smaller target. Only a handful of American bombers commit their attack against her. One bomb strikes near the rear elevator. The explosion sends a column of fire upward through the flight deck. Fuel and ammunition stored nearby ignite immediately. Flames spread rapidly across the hangar spaces below. Crew members rush to contain the fire, but the damage spreads faster than they can control. Only a short distance away, Sōryū receives multiple direct hits in quick succession. Bombs pierce the flight deck and explode within the interior compartments where aircraft have been armed and fueled. Within seconds, the hangar decks become a chain of fire and detonations. The carrier's own preparations have turned them into vulnerable targets. Armed bombs, torpedoes, aviation fuel, and parked aircraft now feed the growing fires. On the bridges of the ships, officers attempt to organize damage control. Orders are shouted across smoke-filled corridors. Firefighting teams move through burning passageways carrying hoses and extinguishers. But the explosions continue. Each blast spreads flames farther through the confined spaces. Within minutes, the three carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Sōryū, are engulfed in uncontrolled fires. Aircraft that had been prepared for launch are destroyed before ever leaving the deck. Hangars collapse inward as structural damage spreads. Thick black smoke rises thousands of feet into the sky above the fleet. For the Japanese sailors on board, the moment is chaotic and disorienting. Some struggle to fight the fires. Others attempt to rescue injured crew members from burning compartments. Damage control teams attempt to flood magazines before further explosions can reach them. But the fires continue to spread beyond control. Out on the open ocean, the remaining Japanese carrier Hiryū begins maneuvering away from the burning ships. Her flight deck crews work quickly to prepare aircraft for immediate launch. The battle has not yet ended. But in the space of only a few minutes, the balance of the carrier force has changed dramatically. 3 of the Imperial Japanese Navy's frontline carriers are now burning. Smoke columns rise high above the Pacific. And the sky above the fleet is suddenly empty again. North Pacific Ocean, northeast of Midway, June 4, 1942, 10:27 a.m. Smoke climbs into the clear Pacific sky in 3 enormous columns. From miles away, the burning carriers can already be seen. Dark pillars rising above the horizon where the Japanese strike force had only minutes earlier moved in disciplined formation. The sea around them remains calm, but on the decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Sōryū, the world has changed in moments. Fire spreads through compartments designed for aircraft operations rather than prolonged battle damage. Hangar decks, once crowded with aircraft preparing for launch, now burn with aviation fuel and exploding ordnance. On Kaga, flames move rapidly along the length of the carrier. Ammunition detonations echo through the ship's structure, sending fragments of metal across the deck. Fire crews continue fighting despite the heat. Some attempt to control the blaze with hoses and portable extinguishers. Others struggle to move wounded sailors away from the most dangerous areas. The damage control systems are overwhelmed. Every new explosion pushes the fire farther through the ship. Nearby, Sōryū suffers similar destruction. Aircraft stored below deck have ignited, turning the interior of the ship into a series of uncontrolled fires.
Smuka fills passageways.
Ventilation systems carry flames deeper into the hull. Crew members attempt to seal compartments, but the speed of the spreading fires leaves little time. On the bridge of Akagi, officers watch the fires intensify below. The flagship of the Japanese carrier force had entered the morning as one of the most powerful ships in the Pacific. Now the damage spreads from the aft section toward the center of the vessel. Efforts to organize damage control continue, but reports arriving from below decks grow increasingly grim. At sea, the battle does not pause. The 4th carrier, Hiryū, has avoided the immediate destruction that struck the other ships. Her flight deck crews move with urgency. Aircraft are brought forward from the hangar deck. Fuel lines are connected again. Bombs and torpedoes are secured beneath wings. Within a short time, Hiryū launches her own counterattack against the American carriers that delivered the earlier strike. The aircraft climb into the sky and disappear eastward. Hours later, those planes will locate and attack USS Yorktown, damaging the American carrier severely. But the events unfolding over the Pacific are now moving faster than any single commander can fully control. Back above the ocean, American aircraft that completed the dive bombing attack circle briefly before turning away. Some pilots look back over their shoulders. The view is unmistakable. 3 carriers burn fiercely in the morning light. Black smoke spreads across the sky in wide drifting plumes. The scale of destruction is still difficult to understand. For the American aircrews returning toward their own carriers, the immediate concern is fuel. Many aircraft have been flying for hours. Navigation over the open ocean remains uncertain. Pilots must locate their own ships again before their tanks run dry. Behind them, the burning Japanese carriers continue fighting for survival. But the damage inflicted during those few minutes has already altered the structure of the fleet. Hangars destroyed, air groups eliminated, flight decks rendered unusable. The ships themselves still float, but their ability to operate as carriers is gone. Through the afternoon and evening, fires continue consuming the vessels. Damage control teams work until exhaustion forces them to withdraw. Eventually, the decision is made to abandon the ships. Destroyers move alongside to rescue surviving crew members. Some sailors stand on deck watching the flames move across the carrier that had carried them across the Pacific for years. The ships that had launched the attacks on Pearl Harbor only months earlier are now beyond recovery. Later, Japanese destroyers will fire torpedoes to scuttle what remains. Elsewhere on the ocean, the battle continues into the afternoon. American dive bombers will eventually locate Hiryū and strike her as well. By nightfall, all 4 carriers of the Japanese strike force are lost. Hundreds of aircraft are destroyed. Many experienced pilots and deck crews, men who cannot be quickly replaced, are gone. But in the moment immediately following the attack, the men involved do not yet speak of turning points. They see only burning ships, exhausted crews, and aircraft searching the sky for a place to land. The Pacific stretches outward in every direction, quiet again except for distant smoke. Yet something fundamental has shifted. Fleets no longer need to see one another to fight. The decisive blows have come not from battleships exchanging fire across the horizon, but from aircraft launched hundreds of miles away. For centuries, naval power had been measured by the size and strength of ships carrying the largest guns. Now, in the space of a few minutes over open water, a different reality has taken hold. Aircraft and carriers will determine the future of war at sea, and the transformation begins in 7 minutes above the Pacific.